Red Fay 48, E1, Identity Amidst Existential Angst, 7/28/25. Hello, social media mites and mavens. My name is James Homan. I publish under J.L. Homan, and I'm a social media novice, so adventuring into this technological realm with some trepidation. Please excuse any faux pas on my part. This learning curve is steep. I'm a baby boomer with an alter ego named Madame Vanilova X Trektinsky, a Russian prima ballerina who sought political asylum with her partner, Mikhail Mypanzarov, in the turbulent 1960s. We have survived as well as achieved many things of which you may or may not find interesting. I was the first in either parent's family to attain a college degree. I was awarded scholarships with two international dance companies. I danced professionally in three Broadway shows and in two Radio City spectaculars with the Rockettes. I survived the Red Scare of the 1950s, the civil rights demonstrations throughout the 60s, gay rights demonstration, women's liberation, and AIDS throughout the 1970s, as well as the more contemporary pandemics of COVID and its many variations. In 1970, I worked as a pool attendant at a high rise condo complex on Biscayne Bay. I slept on the sofa of three Playboy bunnies in Miami Beach for several months before the renovation of South Beach. But they taught me more than I needed to know or ever learned in theater courses about makeup. After obtaining my Actors Equity card at St. Louis Municipal Opera at auditions for their 1975 summer music season, I moved to New York City to dance. Well, also to follow the first of my three longtime relationship heartthrobs, whom I'd met at a gay bar on our closing night in Kansas City, Missouri. I've performed with, among others, Ed Ames, the Hudson Brothers, Margaret Hamilton, Anne Reinking, Dolores Gray, Donna Michi, Larry Kurt, Carol Lawrence, Ginger Rogers, David Cassidy, Donny Osmond, and the inimitable Carol Channing. I buried my second partner in the 15th year of our monogamous, HIV negative, mutually beneficial relationship, the result of a glioblastoma multiforme, the most aggressive form of brain cancer. I've traveled throughout North America and Europe. I retired recently from a Fortune 100 company. I live with my third and current partner of over 20 plus years in Western Massachusetts. I have successfully undergone bilateral hip replacements and also have a reconstructed right ankle. Yes, titanium is my closest friend. And I've also written two books to date. I am, and have always been, an artist. And as I'm rounding third base, I'd prefer to say, quietly crumbling. What I hope to do is introduce weekly installments of my writing so that my experiences across 2 centuries can be included in the cosmic consciousness of our collective LGBTQIA plus community. This is my only legacy. Should you be interested in contacting me, please click on the thumbprint image located on your screen. Thank you for your time and consideration. Existential is defined as relating to existence. Angst is defined as a feeling of deep anxiety or dread, typically an unfocused one, about the human condition or the state of the world in general. In fifth grade, following an overnight at a friend's house with whom something very intimate happened in his big brother's bed, the details of which are noted in my collection of reflections entitled Reverie Alone Will Do. But I remember finding the word homosexual in the dictionary the next day. And of course, I thought, well, I must be the only one in the entire world I'm told that is a typical response of most pubescent young Midwestern males. That definition was not followed by any available resources with which to comfort, negate, or confirm my suspicions, but it seemed a relief in having begun to define what I was, of course, leaving subsequent quandaries. Don't quandaries lie within the very foundation of puberty for most adolescents, regardless of gender or sexual identification? I was born in 1948 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I have never not been queer. Since my overnight confirmation in fifth grade, I prefer to think of myself as being simply, as Dana Garvey's church lady might say, special. Following graduation from the University of Wisconsin in Madison with a BA in English, when the unemployment rate was approaching 14%, I first hitchhiked to LA and then Miami Beach, chasing my dancing dreams. I moved to Manhattan in the mid 1970s, which was the equivalent of Dorothy's visit to Oz. At that time, it was not for nothing that LGBT people were called, quote, friends of Dorothy's, unquote. Forget lions and tigers and bears, oh my. There were drag queens, dykes on bikes, leather bars, robin bird, and chicks with dicks. I have lived, I have loved, and I have lost. But most surprising to me is that I've survived all these phases of childhood, high school, college, and now find myself a gay aging elder, living in a stage of life I hadn't realized existed until now. It's beyond retirement, it's beyond bionic, beyond an age I never thought I would attain. I call it quietly crumbling. While life has most definitely become easier, I am left feeling an existential angst I was not expecting, an aloneness, even though I'm married, and I find it very difficult to get out of bed every morning. While we know different cultures experience their phases of life differently, research indicates that details for our LGBTQIA plus community are uncommonly unique, rarely discussed, and should become more a part of the public conversation. I thought I knew who I was, a gay boomer of a certain age, living in the USA with an imaginary alter ego. Yet it is disconcerting to admit at this stage that I find it difficult to own an identity. It is not that I don't have any idea of who I am. I've experienced very defining aspects of life within the past 70 plus years, both positive and negative. I'm left with an inkling that I'm living on a fluid spectrum that isn't exactly male or female, which is not only a bit strange for this elderly internet novice, but also wonderfully creative. Therefore, I've decided to do this private audio podcast to share, if not connect with, other boomers who may be experiencing similar quandaries of identity. I was born and educated in a lower middle working class community in the southeast corner of the state of Wisconsin. I was indoctrinated in that very unimaginative status quo, a dual linear basis of male versus female, and subsequently the hetero slash homo dichotomy. Either or. Variations were secreted, which was exciting, I suppose. I was therefore bombarded throughout life with all the status quo ad campaigns defining, if not cementing, the necessary identifiers of both orientations. These requirements were then reinforced by all religious beliefs as God given versus sinful. Predominating peer pressure found status quo reinforcement through the educational systems, social engagement etiquette, entertainment options, and, as previously noted, all religious congregations. Unauthorized actions, when their urgent heads were raised, were either completely ignored or deemed illegal by federal government up until the latter part of the last century. Any solid sense of personal identity is something that individuals in my community struggle to attain, let alone maintain. Feeling tenuous, secrecy reigned. Whether anyone is gay, straight, or on whatever spectrum, the only shared permanent aspect of human life on planet Earth is change. What two consenting adults choose to do in the privacy of their own bedroom is simply their own business and no one else's. Remember what we all learn in therapy, that there are only three kinds of business: your business, God's business, and everyone else's business. Learning to deal honestly with these dynamics of identity is, for everyone, exclusively individual and also existential as it relates to one's existence. For all people, but especially gay people, it is very sincere. It is a very sincere personal struggle for existence, finding identity amidst existential angst. Now, there's a course I never found in any college curriculum. Certain aspects of an individual's identity are passed down from one's parents: physical characteristics, genealogical characteristics, temperament as modeled from those parents, preferences as well as abilities. Our educational system then spends 12 years molding, remoldering, or smoldering our either or identities to prescribed standards as indicated by society and or mandated by regulatory testing authorities, not only academic, but also athletic, physical, and intramural, social, scientific, medical, as well as psychological, mental. But where are the courses on identity within any present curriculum? One of the most shocking revelations of adulthood for me has been the quote, revisionistic unquote version of our history that is repeatedly taught in untruthful ways throughout all 12 years curriculums, beginning with the very real genocide with which colonists gained and maintained control of North America. Other facts have been revised as well by the elected white male autocracy, such as slavery being a necessary basis of economy, or the political necessity of undeclared wars, for example, Vietnam. The fact that Eleanor Roosevelt had a female, quote, first friend, unquote, live in the White House during FDR's administration. Is any American identity, after having completed one's education, realized on any truthful basis? The history we were taught certainly wasn't. History presents a plethora of, shall we say, alternative facts, to quote Mr. Trump's first press secretary, as challenges to our individual belief systems, all of which have been successfully covered up with a necessarily acceptable overlay of violence, aggression, and greed, whose definitions are generally attributed to only two basic human motivators: money and power. Could the current administration of our country be any more perfect an example? How did gay people survive any of it? Human society, as depicted throughout history, seems to have initially disregarded our proclivities. Plato, in the 5th century, making mention of us in his Republic, rejects homosexual intercourse because it can render men unfit for marriage, is contrary to nature, and a shameless indulgence. Even though homosexuality ran rampant throughout the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus in his day, to quote, Plato's Laws recommends that homosexuality, like adultery, fornication, and the use of prostitutes, not be engaged in, that if it is engaged in, it be kept private or closeted, and that if it is discovered, it be punished by deprivation of human rights or more severe penalties. 5th century, yeah? In effect, Plato's Laws recommends criminalization. Quite unexpectedly, and beginning when, who knows when, homosexual proclivities became tacitly de rigueur in most European dynasties, not to mention English boys' schools. Same sex experiences were simply hushed up as a mere element of childhood. Boys will be boys. Those boys became men and were elected to legislative branches of governments that then deemed homosexuality illegal throughout the English speaking world as, quote, gross indecency, unquote, a perversion. Remember Oscar Wilde? A perversion of what? Identity? Morals? No, a perversion of laws. Beginning in the late 19th and continuing in the 20th century with the burgeoning interest in psychological development, homosexuality was defined as a sickness. This all fell conveniently under Herr Führer's ethnic cleansing efforts during World War II. Homosexuals became an element to be eradicated, leaving little to bolster any identity not defined as Aryan. Only within the middle decades of the last century, the American Medical Association classed homosexuality as a condition requiring a cure. The early 20th century spectrum of, again, only two polar definitions of human sexuality are identified by Kinsey, although some would argue not accurately researched, and the results became societal norms on spectrums whose variant degrees are ignored, if not totally negated. Aside from the American Indians, the German Jews, and Armenians, the homosexuals survived. Thank you, Gloria Gaynor, for the disco hit, I Will Survive. As civil rights gained increasingly greater momentum for racial justice within the United States throughout the 1960s, educated youth demonstrated against any and all social injustices. At the same time, that generation, the baby boomers, my generation, were protesting an undeclared war that was targeted against people their own age. Young men burned their draft cards. Some moved to Canada, following blacks and anti war protesters, both fighting for rights that defined them. The women's and gay liberation efforts galloped not far behind. Feminist women burnt their bras and fought to be accepted as equals to their male counterparts. The demonstrations of the 70s were directed at overriding the existent definitions of race and sex and were becoming a very real threat to those wielding both money and power. The 60s and 70s also brought an understanding to my generation that people could and successfully unite for change. Even after President Kennedy's assassination in Dallas in 1963, following the Reverend Martin Luther King and Senator and U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's assassinations 5 years later in 68, demonstrations became confrontations. My junior and senior years of college were pass fail, were declared pass fail by an administration that could not guarantee students would or could even get to their classes because of the number of armed U.S. National Guard stationed at every lecture hall entrance. I remember tear gas canisters being thrown and shattering plate glass windows in lectures of over 200 students. Violence erupted. People died from bombings at the University of Wisconsin's chemistry lab in 1970 and then at Kent State in 1971, while those in control, as well as many who were out of control, wielded their last ditch attempts to restore a kind of questionable, quote, normalcy, unquote. Normalcy being almost as indefinable as identity, whether you are or were gay, straight, or anywhere on whatever spectrum, the equilibrium of Madam Justice's two scales of balance became increasingly more difficult to maintain when accountability became impossible to determine. Stephen Sondheim's musical Into the Woods contains a fugue in the second act in which all the surviving characters, in an effort to understand accountability for what could possibly be their total elimination by a giant, the verse's clever rhyme scheme of, no, it's your fault, doesn't obscure the fact that details can and will be interpreted differently by all individuals. How is identity then to be defined? The 21st century has many new giants. In our very real world, accountability for the possible annihilation of our species was accurately credited to the Manhattan Project, Robert Oppenheimer's creation of the atomic bomb in the 1940s. This was dropped twice on Japan to end World War II. Thankfully, that extreme and particularly devastating solution has not been used since. However, we live daily in perpetual anticipation that those closest to the ignition buttons will inaccurately or absurdly justify their actions and begin a World War III to secure and maintain world dominance. In the late 70s and early 1980s, a deadly pandemic, later identified as having curiously originated from Patient Zero, a gay male Canadian flight attendant, began devastating society by eliminating gay men. Some of us suspected this to have been initiated by the elderly white-haired male elected autocrats in Washington, D.C. Since undeclared wars had become illegal, was there a more effective way to reduce the challenging levels of young male testosterone? AIDS, like cancer, has become a $1 million business over the last 50 years, and as such has little likelihood of finding a cure. Personally, I stopped counting my AIDS losses at 69 friends and acquaintances in 1983. Most recently, humans have masked themselves against COVID-19 and its variants. The maxim about running but not being able to hide comes to mind. Mother Nature is not happy with our species, you know. How could she be? We deliberately and without remorse continue to destroy her planet. Additionally, the means of total annihilation has become a possibility for any warring nation. Our society, to be sure, is as helpless as the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Is total obliteration of the human race not inevitable? While we may be evolved, accomplished, and miraculously self-generating, our Homo sapiens genus is not everlasting. We are, however, proven to be destructive and like most likely self-destructive when it relates to power and money. As a member of this species, that presumption makes me radically uncomfortable. Is it possible to define identity amid this existential angst? Or has personal identity become as disposable as plastics and other recyclables that currently litter not only our oceans, but also our cosmos? Is not acceptance of homosexuality to be seen is not acceptance of homosexuality to be seen more as a function of biodiversity rather than a threat to white male autocracy? Eric Erikson defines the eighth and last category of human development as wisdom, ego integrity versus despair. Is it okay to have been me? Whether my generation admits it or not, we've arrived at that stage. The baby boomers have had to deal with possibly more aspects of change than any humans in history. While most in my generation would define change as coins in their pockets or pocketbooks, change also defines a psychological, sociological, all encompassing, very real dynamic requiring serious daily attention and concern. How does that change apply to our ego identity? Given that this may not be only my concern, it feels desperately singular, alienating, disconnecting me, us, from the community we remember as having achieved goals in our more radical youth. The result for me is certainly not one of ego integrity, but rather despair, which, as the character of Ulysses sings in the closing act of Jerome Morose and John Treville Latouche's 1954 musical, The Golden Apple, despair cuts through me like a knife. What is the meaning of this life? If life and death go hand in glove, what motive has a man to love? It seems that our entire human existence on planet Earth has been simplified or synthesized into, again, only two significant end goals: power and money. Is change then predicated on these two aspects of life? A bit shallow, wouldn't you say? Where in that shallowness do we acknowledge the greatest artistic contributions of art, dance, theater, painting, science, music, architecture? Where do we honor the greatest creative, medical, scientific, and mathematical contributions? We as a generation have accomplished great things, all of which has been left afloat in a shallow puddle of anxiety and despair. I'm embarrassed and having difficulty owning that unfortunate, truly unhelpful reality. As John Williams' protagonist, named Stoner in his wonderful novel of the same name, comes to realize at the end of his life, the wisdom we were conditioned to expect in growing older has been replaced by ignorance. I have often been told that while people may have little control over the actual details of one's life, each person retains the choice of perception of those details. Is this difficulty I'm having a simple choice of perspective? Can perception mitigate existential angst? This may be terribly simplistic, but speaking simplistically, I've also found that self-medicating daily with vodka helps, if only occasionally and for a limited time. Thank you for listening. Well, that's it for this podcast. Please check in for episode 2 as I begin presenting a very personal, very medically mired, but hopefully uplifting theater memoir entitled Out Here in the Stars, a memory of love, loss, and learning to let go. It delves deeply, involves the death of my second significant other, partner, and offers a few glimpses into a life in which some dreams are achieved and some of them are shattered, all amidst the ironies and absurdities of living 27 years on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, remembered by some as ground zero. Again, should you be interested in contacting me, please go to the website www.jlhoman.com and proceed to the last page. Thank you for your time and consideration. Again, thanks for listening. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance by embracing similarities and respecting differences. Thank you.